Yeah, we appreciate you guys jumping on. Brennan's going to present most of the content today. And I say this every time we do a webinar, and I give Brennan a hard time about his golfing statues and his perfect hair. But in all seriousness, I've learned so much from this guy. I started at Prime Capital 11 years ago now. I'd been in this industry 7 years before I came here. And I've never learned as much from anyone about advising clients, investing, financial planning as I have from Brennan. So Brennan, I appreciate you taking the time and helping us do this webinar today and doing what you do. I think that everyone on this webinar is going to get a good amount of it. And we're going to do this informally. So while Brennan's presenting, I'm going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have a question, anything that you want to add, type it in, and I'll chime in from time to time with what you guys want to communicate. If we want to steer Brennan in another direction, or just ask him some questions that he wants to talk about. This is all very informal, and we're here for you. So we want to make sure that we're covering what you guys want to talk about. So that's what the chat feature is for. That's what the Q&A is for. Go ahead and chime in, and I will be monitoring it. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off and let you do your thing, Brennan.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Kind words. And I will pay you a $10 bill like we talked about. So Stephen joined us several years ago now and has just been a great addition to our team. Stephen does an awesome job in all advisory realms. His very acute expertise that a lot of us don't have is his work and his grasp on Medicare and Social Security, which if we get to the end of this presentation, we've actually got a slide at the very end that our next webinar that we'd love for you to attend is on Medicare and Social Security. It's kind of the I think the best thing that we do all year long in terms of our education. So Stephen leads that. Roles will be reversed. He'll do 99% of the talking because he is kind of our in-house expert on that. And I would put Stephen up against any advisor in the entire country on that. So that is coming soon. So stay tuned for that. And just want to, I'm really proud of our team. You know, we have built a really, really good team here, and it's not because we're super smart. We have been really blessed with the people that have come to Prime Capital. And so it's been neat to kind of grow together as a family. And I see a lot of names on the attendance list here, a lot of participants that I recognize, and it's just neat to kind of see us all grow together. And one of the things that's fun to talk about is some of the growth that's happened in our retirement accounts. You know, so ultimately that's what we're here for, right? Is to make sure that we get on the right track from a planning standpoint, that we get on the right track from our account balances are going up and to the right. We want to see that. You know, last year wasn't a year where that happened a whole lot. You know, last year we had a really scary year. It was ugly. This time last year we were talking about kind of what the market looks like, and it was at a really down point. You know, you see here on the screen that we were at a really low spot. Kind of this time last year, inflation was crazy high. Markets were down 20 some odd percent. There was a lot of things to be concerned about. And so I think it's important to take a look at where we're at before we just jump into some of the retirement readiness stuff. I think it's important to kind of see where we're at from a market standpoint. And what you'll see here is just this year's version of the exact same slide. And so we've come a long way since that bottom point in the summer of last year. The market last year was down 21% halfway through the year. It finished the year down, about 17-18%. So it was a really scary year. But thankfully, the market has recovered nicely. The market always surprises us, it seems. The market has recovered. You can see there on the top right of your screen that we're within really about 4% of all-time highs again, which was right after the year began in January 2022. So markets have performed very, very nicely. We got this rapid recovery after COVID. That was a lot of the stimulus, right? We saw that 114% jump over the span of really about 18-20 months. And then inflation reared its head, and how our governments decided to fight against that was through interest rates. And so interest rates, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute, but those, interest rates jumped up 450 basis points or so, almost 4.5%. And that's what represents kind of that down into the right trajectory that we saw, last year. So thankfully, inflation's gotten under control somewhat. It's no longer 9%. We're looking at a 3.5% number year over year now, which is much more tolerable and pretty docile. And so it's nice to see that the S&P 500 is back up, and that also is the way that most of our accounts look, right? Most of our accounts, if you're looking at your accounts, year to date, you should be up, depending upon how aggressive or conservative you are, somewhere around kind of that 8 to 12% mark, at the midway point through the year. So pretty positive in terms of 2023 and what that looks like. Obviously, the $1 million question is, okay, that's great. You're telling us about the rear view mirror. Let's look out the windshield for a little bit. And what does that look like? And obviously that's much more difficult, right? We can't paint the picture of what's around the corner because we don't know it. But I will say that it seems like our economy continues to grow pretty consistently. I think the reason that the market has taken off this year, by and large, is a lot of these companies are reporting better performances quarter to quarter than we really anticipated. And so things are, and we anticipated growth. We just didn't anticipate this positive of a growth, right? And so if the year ended right now, we would still be, up pretty good. If you look at the intra-year declines on the next slide, what we see is last year we were at a really ugly spot. Again, far right, you see that at one point our low water mark was down 24%. And while that's not abnormal, because you can see over the last 30, 40 years that every year has its low water mark, 24% is a pretty deep cut, right? And we finished the year down 21%. Well, looking at this year, it's really kind of the opposite side of that coin. This year, markets are up, almost 20%. So 17% on the S&P 500. The NASDAQ is actually up 32%. I haven't looked at it today, but tech, healthcare, those industries are really leading the charge. And so you're seeing the NASDAQ up quite a bit. But if we just look at large cap companies here in the S&P 500, our low watermark is really not quite as low as it was last year. So thankfully, we're seeing still volatility, but that volatility is on the positive side. And so it doesn't bother us as investors and savers like that negative side does. One of the things that Stephen flipped over there to, and we'll take a look at, is, I mentioned it earlier, inflation. Inflation is something that is really driving, it's kind of the tail wagging the dog right now. And, this was last year's look at inflation. So in blue, you've got what's called headline inflation, which is what the Fed looks at. It's the big kind of CPI number that you read about in the news so much. And that's what got up to almost 9.2% about this time last year. Well, we roll over to this year and we see that inflation has rolled over really, really good. All these interest rate increases have really gotten inflation under control. Again, we've still got pockets to where it's kind of pretty hot and heavy. Housing, we're seeing that, right? That's probably a supply issue. We're seeing it some in energy still, right? Gas is on the rise again. So we're not out of the woods, but I do want to say that inflation is down around that 50-year average again, rather than, way, way up like we saw it in the late 70s. And so that feels a lot better. That's more tolerable long-term than some of those high numbers, because that will wreck an economy. You're seeing countries around the world. Argentina right now is struggling with inflation really, really badly. You're talking, almost 40% inflation over the last couple of years, year over year. So that it's pretty crippling. And so that's why the government stepped in and said, hey, we're going to take our medicine. We're going to take some short-term pain here over the next year or so. And really that's going to make us a lot better off moving forward. And so that short-term pain came in the form of 2022 and some of the losses that we saw. Again, thankfully, much of that has been recovered, and we're back within, 4 or 5% of all-time highs. I do think it's important to look at interest rates, specifically kind of what the Fed is projecting. And so we get this question all the time is, should I refinance my house? How are things going right now? What do rates look like? And the next slide shows us what the Federal Reserve is really predicting is going to happen. And so you see right now that starting in 2021, just that rapid increase of our underlying interest rates. That's caused mortgages, cars, credit cards, everything to really pop up. But you can see that we may not be at the very top of the escalator, but we're really darn close, right? I think it's next week. It's next week. We'll find out next week, I believe, if the Fed are going to raise rates again. Right now, I think the last thing that I read was there's about a 90% chance that they're going to hold flat, but eventually, the Federal Reserve is predicting that those rates begin to roll over, and we actually see a few rate cuts. We won't be going back down to anywhere near the floor of the x-axis here that you see, right? That's where home loans were at 2.25%, 3%, kind of free money. I doubt that happens, but maybe a much more healthy, kind of 3 to 4% range is where I would see us ultimately landing. And so maybe interest rates come back a little bit. But while the getting's good, we certainly want to take advantage of it. And if you look at the next slide, shows a yield curve, and there's no quicker way to kill a meeting than to break out the yield curve. But just quickly on the left-hand side of this curve, so to show you what you're looking at, the gray line down at the bottom is kind of what the yield curve looked like before all of these interest rate increases started. So 2021. The green line is December 2022, and the blue line are what banks are paying in terms of interest today. And so what I want you to see is the left side, the short-term side of our yield curve has just gotten really whippy. And what that means is most investors aren't predicting that long-term rates are going to change that much. You see that those have stayed pretty static over the last year and a half at around 4%. But what has changed greatly is kind of the 3-month to 24-month interest rates. And so, unless you've been under a rock, you're definitely hearing that CD rates have improved, US Treasuries have improved. And so we're now back to an environment to where both sides of the ledger work, meaning I can invest in the stock market and I can expect a rate of return above inflation and a meaningful rate of return. But on the flip side, I can also take less risk and I can utilize the bond market, or I can utilize fixed income investing in the form of CDs and US Treasuries to get much more risk-free rates of return. And it's not a point nothing, right? It's not a 0.05% or a 1.1%. We're actually able to get, 5.5, 5.7, 5.3 interest credit rates for shorter term obligations. So that's pretty cool. That it's neat to see. Really, the first time we've seen that in probably going back to like 2006, that we've seen kind of both sides be able to work. And so all through school, through college, that's what we were taught is in finance is you've kind of got this risk on appetite, and then you've got this risk off, but you can still get above inflation. And we've been in a hard spot for the last 10 or 15 years because rates have been so low. So it's nice to see things begin to normalize, even though it doesn't feel normal because kind of the new normal for the last 10 or 15 years has been a crazy low interest rate environment. So I think moving forward, we should experience both sides in a much more normal range, which means that you can be a long-term investor and stocks still pay off, but you can also be a short-term saver and really get a good crediting interest rate on that side of your money too, right? It's no longer, well, there's no sense in putting money in the bank because it doesn't pay anything. And so I just have to take risk with everything, which is that's the game that we've been playing for the last 10 or 15 years. So it's nice to see that.
Sorry, that's good stuff, man. My mom is actually on this, and she sent me a text
Oh,
question. So she came in from the extra line, and her question was, "What is CPI?" So if you don't mind, let's back up a couple. And I think what would be helpful is if we could back up a little bit and talk about, in my opinion, and you may or may not agree, you probably do. I think that inflation has been the big kicker that just hammered the market last year. And now that we're getting it under control is why we're starting to see the recovery this year. If you could talk a little bit about how inflation and interest rates and what's going on in the market, how those things are related. And then it seems like we may be in line for a soft landing. If you could talk about that a little bit. On where we're at now, is a soft landing still possible? What is a soft landing, and what does that mean for the folks that are on this webinar for their retirement statements?
yeah. So CPI stands for Consumer Price Index.
You heard
And
that, Mom.
yeah, Consumer Price Index. It's a really, our industry is famous for making things sound fancier than they really are. So CPI is measured by a group of graduate students at the University of Michigan. They've been doing it like this for like 30 or 50 years, something like that. But basically, these grad students, they go and buy the same basket of goods every single month, right? And hypothetically, they go buy a loaf of bread, a gallon of gas, a gallon of milk, a new car. They go buy these same 30 kind of core items, and they measure and track the cost of that over time. And that's what we call CPI, or that's our tracker of inflation, right? And so the Federal Reserve and our government putting all their chips on these grad students at the University of Michigan to track inflation for us. I've always thought that's pretty cool. So that's how they do that. So CPI, or Consumer Price Index, is what we're paying month over month for the same basket of goods. How does that impact rates, and how does that impact kind of this where we're headed? Stephen used a term called soft landing. If you're a glutton for punishment and have paid a lot of attention to Fed Chair Jerome Powell's comments that he makes on a monthly basis, he's used this soft landing term, right? Like an airplane coming into the runway. Hard landing obviously ends in shrapnel going everywhere, and the economy kind of comes to a grinding halt, which is, we raised rates too fast or too far to try to offset inflation. And so what we've done is we try to slow the amount of borrowing that happens by higher rates, which makes us buy less stuff. There's less free money in the system because the money is now more expensive. And so I'm much less apt to buy a new vehicle if rates are at 9.5% than I am when I can get interest-free financing for 60 months from GMAC, right? And so that's how they slow that down. As buying slows, that brings pricing down, right? Which is inflation. It's coming, or which is the opposite of inflation. Prices are coming down. So they're trying to kind of match that supply and demand, but they're trying to artificially control it with money that's a little bit more costly to borrow in the form of interest rates. So if you don't get that really pretty right, and what ends up happening is you end up raising rates too far, too quick, and things come to a grinding halt. And that's that hard landing to where ultimately the country doesn't grow very fast or at all for a year or two, right? Because it takes a while to get those balance back out. And that's what we would call a recession. And so that's that hard landing. Soft landing would be where the airplane kind of comes in, landing gear, works perfectly, and we can kind of go on about our day. That's where they get it right? This kind of tap dance that the Fed is trying to do of slowly raising rates and then maybe slowly dipping them down just a little bit to make sure that we get this kind of Goldilocks scenario of just right performance in terms of rates with inflation, to where our economy, instead of going from 2% growth, 2% growth, 2% growth, 6% growth. Oh my goodness, that's too much. We need to slow this thing down. Let's get back to 2%, right? Versus 6% is too hot. We're going to run inflation too high. Let's stop it. And it goes from 6 way past 2% growth and all the way to negative 5% growth, right? That's that hard landing. So that's how those things correlate in the government, in my opinion. This is Brennan's opinion, one man's opinion. I think they've done a pretty good job, honestly. The Federal Reserve, in my opinion, has done a pretty good job of getting us to where we're at, right? They didn't have a lot of tools in their tool belt to begin with because interest rates are really, really low. And so they've slowly tried to raise those. They started that in 2018, and then COVID hit. And so they had to back off and say, oh, just kidding. We're going to lower rates again because we're in this kind of weird pandemic. Now that we're on the other side of that, they've really tried to raise rates again to have a lever to pull should they need to help kind of buttress the economy a little bit. So as of right now, they've not needed to. The economy is growing really nicely. It's just this balance of we don't want to overcook. We don't want to overcook the cinnamon rolls. We made cinnamon rolls this morning for breakfast for Max and Ivy before school. And so sometimes if you leave them in the oven too long, like Dad does, that may or may not have happened this morning, right? It kind of ruins everything. And I think that's what the hard landing folks are really watching out for is, are they leaving interest rates too high too long? And is that gonna burn the cinnamon rolls? Didn't think I'd be bringing that up this morning, but
the cinnamon rolls. And I think another thing, and this is a question that just came in that tends to be working, is that the labor supply seems to be correcting itself. There have been some reports that came out that wages are starting to be under control. If you ask either employees or employers, wages tend to be coming under control. Unfilled jobs are going to be filled. So when we look at, a big contributor, and this is the specific question where how much have hourly wages and these wage increases contributed to CPI and interest rates. So I think that the wage increase and the labor shortage has been a huge part of what we've seen going on with inflation and the CPI in general. And it looks like these increases in interest rates that we've seen have both controlled. They brought down the CPI, they brought down the year-over-year inflation, and wages, and some of the labor shortage seems to be correcting along with that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think another thing that we've seen, I saw a slide to this effect a couple of weeks ago, is the for the first time in like the last 20 years or so, the labor force is made up of what our government calls prime age group. They've got a fancy name for it, but basically more workers in the age category of 25 to 55. That now makes up a majority of the United States workforce, which is normal, right? There's a lot of people in that kind of, young adult to 55-year-olds. Nobody's getting close to retirement in that category. And so a good, healthy economy, that's the group of people that should be working. And because of our demographics and a few other things, for the last several years, the majority of our workforce has really been consistent of people 56 and over. And so what we're seeing, and a lot of folks are retiring, a lot of folks kind of got out of the workforce and retired early during COVID and just didn't come back. And so what we're seeing is this little bit of a kind of a grand reset in the labor market. And I think that's been healthy. We've seen wage growth come down because of that, which is healthy, right? It's not healthy for companies to all be chasing after the same new hire, because now that new hire has all the power and he or she can command, so much higher wages. And ultimately that's going to roll down to us in the form of inflation, because if Walmart has to pay $50 an hour for their cashier as opposed to $15 an hour, the cost of my shampoo is going way, way high, right? Like the cost of toothpaste is going way, way high, because ultimately that feeds its way through. So I think we're in a healthier spot. My my hunch is we're in for probably a soft landing, which I think is a really healthy thing. And I think what that means for folks moving forward is that they can really kind of keep this attitude of how do I want to put it? What's my risk tolerance need to be according to my age? If you go a couple slides in advance, I'll skip a couple of these, but
and before you move on, Brennan, you
yeah,
mentioned shampoo prices, and I know that's a big line item for you, this hair products in general.
that's right. So keep going. One more. So this right here is, I think it's something that allows participants, really no matter where you're at in terms of age, to still focus on kind of our long-term risk objectives, right? And so I don't think we're in a spot to where, we all need to be aggressive, right? Like we have really the last 10 years or so, because it's been really hard to get any sort of rate of return in the bond market or the CD market. Fixed income has been really difficult because rates have been really low, and that's forced us all to the right side of this table. On the left-hand side, though, I also think that if we're not in for this hard landing, if it looks like we're going to navigate this well, this allows us to kind of stand back and say, okay, where do I fit on this spectrum? And some of that is about age, and some of it is just about that risk level that you're comfortable with in your gut, right? Some of us are more risk averse than others. And so I think it's important to kind of look at, from an age band standpoint, where you fall. And this retirement readiness talk it's not just for folks that are 55 and over and kind of nearing retirement. How I think this fits is certainly age dependent. And so we've got a little check sheet, or a little kind of list here, bullet point list of, these are kind of some things that we would recommend if you're in your 20s, right? Like, we need to be just kind of really focused on saving and getting started the right way, And so what that looks like is, pay attention to debt, right? Pay attention to save, good old fashioned savings account, have an emergency fund, and then let's start focusing on some long-term planning. And you can read down through, though, in your 30s and 40s, things begin to get a little bit more sophisticated, typically in your 40s, right? Life starts picking up speed a little bit. College is possibly around the corner for some kiddos. Maybe I've been saving for a good long while. Do I need to continue with this aggressive strategy? Because I'm starting to get enough money in my accounts now that I'm kind of getting nervous when the market goes down. When I had $2,000 in my account and the market dropped by 20% and I lost $400, I wasn't happy about it, but that didn't really ruin my day, right? But now that I've got, $100,000 in my account and the market goes down by 20%, that's a deal breaker, right? And so how do I need to behave kind of moving into this next phase of life from an investment strategy standpoint? I think we're smart by looking at that. But and then Stephen, you kind of come into the mix in terms of what does it look like as we kind of move into our 50s and move into our 60s in terms of retirement planning and in terms of readiness. And here's where I think we talk about, okay, those are next steps, right? I get it in my 20s and my 30s, the gas pedal is still on the right side. So find it and go, and just make sure we keep it, between the white lines. What do we focus on when we're in our 50s and 60s? Because we need to start looking out on down the road a little bit farther.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's never too early to plan. I think that, like you said, in your 20s, we're learning. I can't tell you how many 20-year-olds that we've enrolled into their company's 401k plan. And, they're at a point that maybe I've got small children at home. I have student loans. I have this situation. I'm just establishing my career, so I can't do a lot. So in our 20s, we may start out saving $10 a pay period. And it's not necessarily about investing the $10 a pay period, but it's just getting into the habit of, okay, now I know what that line item means when I see it on my pay stub. Now I know what that means when I get my quarterly statement. Of course, in the 30s, and when we get in our 30s, we're hitting that phase in life that our kids have saxophone payments. We're buying baseball bats. Maybe we're doing travel ball. We're running kid A to this practice, kid B to this practice, and time to pick up kid C from school and run them there. So life is chaotic. In our 40s, things can start to slow down a bit. Maybe we're getting one kid out of into college or one kid out of school or somewhat independent. And as that just progresses, we go through these different life phases. But I would say about all of these life phases is there's always a reason that we can tell ourselves that, this next phase of life is when I'm going to do it. So I would say that if you're in those 20s, 30s, your 50s phase, one or two times a year, if your advisor is on campus, take the time to meet with them, even if you don't know what question you have or what you need to ask. It's almost like your annual physical with your physician. Just, I want to come in, I want to check up, I want to see if there's something that I need to change. Do I need to be saving differently? Do I need to be investing differently? Whatever that is, just to say, hey, I'm kind of going to keep my eye on the ball. Once you go into your 60s, that's probably where most of you are going to be introduced to me. Again, kind of my specialty, my niche at this firm is to help people get to that point that we've been working for the past 10 or 20, 30 years, and now we're going to start making that transition into retirement. And that's when things become much more concrete. If you're in your 30s or 40s and Brendan or I or Travis or Jason or Heath or Jonathan or any of our advisors here at our firm are doing a financial plan, and you're in your 30s or you're in your 40s, we're fine to say, yeah, we can just estimate from your income what your Social Security is going to be, because there's still so many variables between now and retirement that we want to make sure that you're projecting to a most likely favorable outcome. By the time that we get in our 60s, we're not playing horseshoes anymore. We need to be a ringer at this point. So we need to start making some concrete decisions. We need to go to the Social Security website and we need to pull our Social Security statement, because we need to know exactly what that amount is going to be. We need to start thinking about, what have I been doing for health insurance? How much does this cost? What do I need to factor in when I don't have insurance through my employer anymore? And of course, at that point, we're still saving. We're kind of in the home stretch of working. We need to start looking at our income. Really, when we're doing financial planning for any age group, it's almost as simple as money in and money out. And we want to make sure that balances. So the first thing that we need to know is, hey, how much income am I going to need in retirement? What am I going to have coming in? Am I going to have Social Security? Am I going to have a pension? If there are some gaps there, I need to know now. I don't need to wait until my retirement party to find out that I'm $300 a month short in retirement. And then, of course, that's why we've been saving all of these years. When we're in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, early 60s, we're saving this money to build our nest egg. And then that nest egg is what we use each month to make up that difference. We get this question all of the time. And Brendan, I would appreciate you chiming in here too, just to give another perspective. But people will say, okay, I'm turning 65 or 66 or 67. I'm getting ready to retire. Do I need to take this 401k and do I just need to cash it out? And I told you guys the very first thing that I told you when we started today is that I've learned a lot from Brennan. And one thing that I heard Brennan say early on when I first met him that I've kind of stole and taken credit of, and I actually tell people that you stole this from me, Brennan, but the opposite is true, is, hey, when we retire, we're retiring, we're not dying. So we still need to make some return in retirement. So when we go across that checklist of what we do when we start getting closer to retirement, one thing that I would add in is, hey, I need to look at my allocation of my money and what bucket it's in. So typically what we want you to look like when you're a year or two out from retirement is we want to have a few different buckets that we can pull from. So, the core of our nest egg, the absolute backbone of our retirement income strategy is going to be our 401k, our IRA, our investment portfolio. That's the money that's there that we're projecting to continue to grow, to get a return, to earn interest for the next 5, 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 years, as long as people are living now. And then we also want to have some money in savings, because what we don't want to do is every time that the transmission goes out, a tree falls on the roof, I get an expensive medication that I need filled, we don't want to have to sell off our investment portfolio every time that happens without any control. And then how that works, and we have a few different levers to pull in an actual, what Brennan do with our clients that are retired on a day-to-day basis, is we have clients that they need money. We're pulling out of their nest egg, and we're deciding where it comes from. So if you look at this graph, reflects the S&P 500 from 2018 to 2022. And like always, there have been some ups and downs. But if I have a client, if you look at 2018, if you look at 2020, if you look at 2022, where there are some of those blue circles, that's when the market was doing pretty good. If you look at 2019, 2020, kind of after the COVID recovery and fall, if you look at especially last year, 2022, some of those red circles are when the market was not doing as good. So if you're a client and you call in and say, hey, we need a new transmission, we're putting a down payment on a camper, a kitchen, whatever we need, and the market's been doing pretty well, and it's in that blue circle, it's in when the market's doing well, Brendan and I are going to say, well, hey, the market's doing pretty well, let's lock in some of these gains, sell off a little bit of your portfolio, put that in your checking account, and then you've got the money for your roof, transmission, vacation, whatever it is that you need. If we're not in a good market period, if we're in 2022, if we're in last year, if we're in 2008, or some of those red circles, that may be the point that we say, you know what, let's let this rest a little bit. Let's not lock in these losses, and let's pull some money from your checking account. Let's pull some money from your savings account. So that's why it's important. If you say, well, I can't pull that money from my savings account because I only have $1,500 there, that's where Brennan and I have failed in our obligation to you to make sure that, hey, we've planned for this, because we know that the market is going to go up and it's going to go down. We want to have a plan in place that we've planned for income for all of those scenarios.
And I would say that this strategy is probably more effective today than it was 5 years ago, because that middle bucket, that savings bucket, like I mentioned earlier, I mean, we bought a CD for a client Friday for 5.7%. Like we used to not be able to do that. And so because rates have so drastically changed the landscape of what's available to us now as advisors, it's just a different tool. And so now we have access to say, hey, you know what, that like we can park money there short term, and it's not going to hurt us. We're actually going to have a decent, respectable rate of return. And so we can kind of use this to build a moat around us and our family to kind of keep, the boogeyman at bay, if you will, right? That transmission or that, whatever that, the HVAC goes out, like we can kind of use that. And if it doesn't happen, we've not missed out on this big opportunity of investing, because we've been able to earn 5+% for free, right? Pretty risk free. So I think that's a valid way to be thinking about that. Hey, I've got a couple of questions here. One of them I'm going to save for later around Social Security. But the one question is, I hear a lot of chatter about starting to draw out of your 401k plan early, maybe say starting at 62 or so, to avoid a catastrophic tax impact later on down the road. So what say you on this? Is there any validity to that approach? Kind of quickly, my thoughts are, I think we can do a better job planning our tax, our income in our tax bracket, than just, okay, I need to run and pull something out at a certain age. So what do you think on that, Stephen?
Yeah, I think I would agree. I don't think that there's some catastrophic thing that is going to happen if you're not drawing out of your 401k at 62 years old. But I think that there are ways that you can be smart. And I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on taxes, because this is somewhat of of a 101 level class, and I don't want to go 301 level. And you mentioned killing a meeting earlier, and I certainly don't want to do that. But David, there are some circumstances that we may have a client that we can say, hey, you guys aren't taking money from anywhere else. Your Social Security is not taxable right now. You've got a standard deduction of $27,000. So, let's kind of use some of these rules to our favor, pull out some of this taxable money. It counts as, it falls under that standard deduction line. So we're basically getting some money that we got a tax deduction on when we saved it, and now we can pull it out tax free. So
I think
that's something
the main
to
thing there
that's
is
not
like
apply to everyone.
plan
Right.
is paramount. It like we spend a lot of time talking about investments and all, like that's the sexy part of this stuff, but the foundation and what holds all of that together, what determines where we invest is the planning. And that's where we get into to me, the retirement readiness aspect of this. When I look at Shelly and I's financial plan once a year, that's where my focus is at. Like I'm typically not real focused on the investment piece until I know that we're squared away on the planning side. And if I've got a lug nut or two loose there, I'm going to pay a whole lot more attention to that than I am, should I buy Apple or Nvidia? Like should that doesn't make sense to me. This has got to be right.
Yeah, I agree. Planning 100%. And then Social Security. Yeah, I think it's going to be solvent in 20 years. The last figures that I saw, this pulling this off of the top of my head. So if someone Googles me, I'm open to being corrected, but I wanted to say that the Social Security trust as it stands right now is set to be solvent in 20 years, or 2037. So what's that? That's 14 years. So solvent. Yeah, I think it will be solvent. And Brendan and I have said this before, and we've got a workshop that we're doing in November specifically on Social Security and Medicare. But I think that one of two things or a combination of both are going to happen. Either benefits are going to have to be reduced. The retirement age may have to be raised, or payroll taxes on Social Security, your FICA stuff is going to have to go up at some point, just because the baby boomers are fully into retirement. Over the past 10, 15 years, the baby boomer generation has trickled in and began drawing benefits. And now we're seeing that generation is almost fully retired. The baby boomer generation did not have as many children as their parents did. So just demographically, we don't have as many taxpayers funding the trust as we do going out, like we did, in 1935 when FDR signed Social Security into law. So do I think that Social Security is going to be there? Yes. Do I think there are going to be changes? Absolutely. And my guess is it's going to be a shared combination, David, between your generation and mine on, I'm probably going to have to pay a little bit more, and some are going to have to take a little bit less. But that's just, what we would call an educated guess.
Yeah. Good questions.
Yeah,
Good question.
Absolutely.
Got about 10 minutes or so here. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So, Stephen, kind of get into some of this. And again, like in October, we've got this, and we've got a QR code for you, for those of you that just are itching to use a QR code. We've got one of those at the end of this presentation, so you can register for that if you'd like to do that. But kind of take us through kind of this, hey, the shot clock, 3 years left. What do I need to really focus on?
Social Security and Medicare planning, number one, or healthcare planning in general. Maybe you're retiring and you're not 65 yet. That's what I spent 35 minutes on the phone doing this morning, was going through a healthcare planning call with a couple that is retiring in a month and a half. Make sure that you're getting debt paid off. If you've got, obviously, if you've got 15 or 20 years left off on your mortgage, I wouldn't encourage you to pay off that cheap money right now. But, if you've got $1,500, a couple $1,000s of lingering credit card debt, $8,000 of lingering credit card or consumer debt, we usually try to get that paid off prior to retirement, because what we don't want is a debt that maybe we were slowly paying off when we're working, our income goes away, and now we've got a 24% interest rate on something hanging over our head in retirement. So we want to get our debt, especially consumer debt, paid off if possible before we retire. Begin tightening budget I think that I built this slide last year. I think my opinion has probably changed. I would change that to begin reviewing your budget. So, I would say that just make sure that, and I would go back to what Brennan harped on a few minutes ago, back to the planning. What does my lifestyle need to look like in retirement, and really start planning for a budget. And then your regular meeting with your retirement advisor. So again, if you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, I think once or twice a year with your on-site advisor, when they're coming to your place of employment, when we're out there seeing you guys in person, or by Zoom or by call, just checking in once or twice at those ages. But then once we get into 2 or 3 years out, that's probably a 2 or 3 times a year. Maybe in that last year, we may be meeting 3 or 4 times a year, just because there are so many different aspects that we need to get lined out to make sure that I'm ready and I'm not getting any surprises. I have a client this morning. He and his wife are in a situation that their health care is going to be $1,200 a month. And there are some people that, just because of their specific situation, if I'm retiring prior to Medicare age and my health insurance is going to be $1,200 a month, we may say, well, oh, heck, this really, really changes things. But, our answer was, yeah, we knew this 2 years ago when we started having these discussions. So I think that's what comes out of regular meeting with your advisor, is just, you're not getting any surprises, at your retirement party or within a couple of days of it. We've got a budget worksheet, a couple of different ways that we can do it. I think that if you're really organized, a spreadsheet or a yellow legal pad is perfectly adequate. We have a budget worksheet that we can send you. If you think that this would be helpful, send Brendan or I an email at the end of this, and I can send you this budget worksheet that we use. Or we can send you a digital one as well. So I think that developing a budget, regardless of your age, that's going to be really the backbone of not just retirement planning, but financial planning in general. Where's my money coming from? How much is it? How much do I have going out, and where's it going? And for those of you that want to, this is a service that we can take that information. We can take that budget information, ask you a few other questions, and we can put together a comprehensive financial plan on our retirement planning software. And I think that this is appropriate for any age group. I think certainly if you're 63 years old and plan on retiring at 65, it makes a whole heck of a lot of sense to have Brendan or I or your advisor at your specific plan put together a comprehensive financial plan. So we can project, what am I going to look like in 2 years? And not only what's it going to look like when I retire at 65, but what is it going to look like when I've been retired for 20 years and I'm 85, and is that sustainable? And what this looks like, this is one that Brendan and I did for a couple 6 months ago, maybe a year ago. And, the news that we were able to deliver is, you guys are living below your means. Your retirement looks like you're in pretty good shape. And what they told us is what most people tell us. Gosh, I feel a lot better. We kind of thought that we were okay, but we feel a lot better. We feel a lot better after actually done it. And then they had some more questions just to kind of illustrate what a comprehensive financial plan is, because a lot of people say, yeah, I hear about financial planning all of the time, but I don't really know what it looks like. So what that looks like is, we show you a graphical representation of what your retirement projection looks like, and then we can put in some what ifs. So this couple had some questions on, if I make some changes to my Social Security, what does that look like? And we were able to not only make some recommendations, but we were able to show them the basis for that recommendation. Or what does it look like if, instead of working another 2 years, if I retire in 6 months, what does that look like? What does it look like if one of us needs to go to the nursing home? And your questions may not be that. Your questions may be, what does it look like if I buy a 30-foot party barge and, a $40,000 shop to put it in? And we can illustrate that for you too, and say, this is the effect that it has on you financially. And this is a service, the comprehensive financial planning, that we do for our clients and retirement plan participants. And we don't charge anything. And we don't charge anything other than the regular retirement plan fees that you pay, whether you use us or not. And a lot of firms we know out there, for this exact same plan, the exact same financial planning software, the exact same process, charge anywhere from $1,500 to $2,500, sometimes even more, for this exact same process. So this is something that I would encourage you guys and your employees to take advantage of, because it's something that we want to do. We've got it down to a fairly streamlined process, and we want to do this for you guys to deliver value. So at the end of this, if this is a process that you want to go through, you can send Brennan or I an email, and we'll tell you what you need to do to get started. What's coming up next, Brennan? We've got a couple. I think I'm on both of these. Next workshop coming up in October and November.
On October 4th, Medicare and Social Security deep dive. Man, don't miss that. That's awesome. That'll be our, we'll have lots of folks join us for that one. By far our most popular thing that we do, just continues to be awesome. So join us for that. And then estate planning. Jason Gerber is going to be going through some estate planning information on November 8th, wills, trusts, power of attorneys, healthcare directives, things of that nature. So this QR code, you will be able to register for that. If you are fed up with QR codes like I may be, you can go to PCIA and on our events page, you can register for all of the events that we do. If you want to, you can pick and choose what you like. You can watch recordings of old ones. Those of you that are on our monthly email or weekly email that we send out every Monday morning, you'll notice at the bottom of that email that you'll see that as well. So all sorts of ways to get registered for these things. So would certainly encourage you to go ahead and do that. And we'll certainly do our best to deliver some good content on the flip side of that. So we appreciate y'all joining us. And if there are not any other questions, there may be. Let me check right quick.
Go to the...
I love QR codes. Nice. So I didn't know how to use them until, COVID and Mexico.
My wife showed me how to pull a menu up during COVID. So
okay, good. Well, we'll get, we don't have any other questions, so we'll jump off here, and we'll make sure, Stephen and I, to send a budget to those of you that requested that, and we'll go from there. All right, guys.
I realized before we get off of here, and I'll let you go, I realized that we changed that last slide so it doesn't have our email addresses on it anymore. So my email address, I'll put it in the chat. It's sbarnes, no E, at PCIAwealth.com. If you have any trouble reaching us, my phone number is also 501-823-4637, or you can just go to your HR person or your benefits person and say, hey, I need to talk to those guys. I need to talk to those guys that did that. I got another request for the budget worksheet. Yeah, send me an email, or if you want to put your email in the chat, and I'll send that out to you.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Good to see everybody's name that joined, and we'll get you everything that we need. So, all right, guys, until next time.
Okay. I'm going to let you go. Don't kill this, Brennan, because I need the webinar chat. If you just want to walk out of your office, you can, because I know you got to run. Tell you what, guys, here's what we're going to do. Let's just send the budget worksheet to everyone that was here. Let's do that. Thanks, guys.